Urgent question, Debbie Abrahams.
To ask the Foreign Secretary if he'll make a statement on the security and humanitarian situation in Kashmir in light of the escalating tensions between India and Pakistan.
Minister Mark Field.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand that the Prime Minister made reference to this earlier during the course of Prime Minister's question time. May I say to the Honourable Lady, the UK is and remains deeply concerned about the rising tensions between India and Pakistan. Understandably, there has been huge interest in this rapidly developing situation. This House will understand it would not be appropriate for me to comment in detail on reportage at this time as the situation evolves. However, what we do understand is that on the 14th of February, at least 40 paramilitary Indian police officers were killed in a suicide attack in India-administered Kashmir. The Pakistan-based militant group Jaish-e-Mohammed claimed responsibility for that attack, and India-Pakistan tensions, already at a high level, rose significantly following that attack, and both countries publicly exchanged heated rhetoric. On Tuesday, the 26th of February, India and Pakistan news reported that Indian jets had crossed the line of control between India and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. There have been further reports of ceasefire violations across the line of control overnight, and the situation remains unclear but fast developing. The Foreign Secretary spoke to his Indian and Pakistani counterparts on Monday to discuss this situation, and we are in regular contact with both countries at senior levels to encourage restraint and to avoid escalating tensions further. We are monitoring developments closely and considering the implications for British nationals. I shall be speaking to both the Indian and Pakistani High Commissioners this afternoon and will continue to press for the importance of restraint. We urge both sides to engage in dialogue and to find diplomatic solutions to ensure regional stability. We are working closely with international partners, including through the United Nations Security Council, to de-escalate tensions. Now, India and Pakistan, Mr. Speaker, are both long-standing and important friends of the United Kingdom. We have many and significant links to both countries through sizable diaspora communities. As a consequence, we enjoy strong bilateral relations with both nations. The UK government's position on Kashmir remains that it is and must be for India and Pakistan to find a lasting political resolution to this situation, taking into account the wishes of Kashmiri people. It isn't for the UK to prescribe, to intervene, or to interfere with a solution or to act as a mediator. Now, I know that the House has previously raised concerns about the humanitarian and human rights situation in both India-administered Kashmir and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. We continue to monitor the situation, and we encourage all states to ensure their domestic standards are in line with international standards.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I just thank you for granting this urgent question, and I'm grateful to the Minister for his response. But this has been an ongoing situation since independence in 1947, and successive governments have failed in dealing with the issues associated with Kashmir to help facilitate peace alongside our international allies. So the Minister, as he's said, is aware of the recent aerial attacks from India and then Pakistan, following on from the militant attack in the Pulwama district of Jammu and Kashmir and the deaths of the 40 Indian troops. This is a proscribed group in Pakistan, and I understand that they are said to be apparently based there, but as I say, they have been proscribed by Pakistan. I'm grateful to the Minister for reporting on the action he's already taken and the dialogue he's already had with counterparts in the High Commission for India and Pakistan, and I'd be grateful if he could report back once he's had meetings on this, because it is a very fast-moving situation. What specifically, he's mentioned the UN Security Council, what specific action has been decided around there? India said airstrikes in Balakot in northwestern Pakistan yesterday were in response to the militant attacks and killed a large number of militants, but Pakistan said there were no casualties. So again, could the Minister clarify these reports? Today, Pakistan claims to have shot down 2 Indian jets when they entered Pakistani airspace. And the Indian news agency ANI has reported that a Pakistani jet has also shot down on the Pakistan side of the line of control. So again, if the Minister is able to expand on some of this information, that would be very helpful. In light of the escalation in military action, will the Foreign Secretary be altering his travel advice to UK citizens? The Minister knows that there is a large Kashmiri diaspora in the UK, many of whom have family who are still based there, and this is a real concern for them around their safety. The escalating tensions, as I say, have had a profound effect on our communities. So what assurance can he give them that the UK government is doing all it can to not just de-escalate tensions now, but work towards a sustainable peace in the region? Both India and Pakistan are nuclear powers. This isn't just an issue for the region, it is an issue for the whole world. Mr. Speaker, as the chair of the Kashmiri PPG, I have repeatedly reiterated our commitment to support a process of peace and reconciliation in the region. But the UK government needs to step up and help facilitate this alongside our international partners. We have a vital role to play, as I say, not just in de-escalation, but also in terms of sustainable peace. And I urge the Minister to do all that he can to do this. Thank you.
May I thank the Honourable Lady for her calm and wise words, and may I also say I appreciate that she has a busy day today already with huge amounts going on near her own constituency with the large-scale fires. So I think we're very grateful for the work, and we all recognise, I think, as members of Parliament, that we are torn sometimes between the important international issues that are also close to our hearts, as well as dealing at a very, what might seem a parochial level, but nonetheless I'm very grateful for her words and her words of calm. May I just say, in relation to the UN specifically, she is right that this is a UN issue of some urgency, simply because obviously both Pakistan and India are nuclear nations, and therefore it is all the more important that we try and dial down some of the rhetoric and indeed, dare I say it, some of the actions that we have seen in recent days. And I think there are many friends of India and of Pakistan, of Kashmir, not just here in the UK but across the world, who are doing their best to try to calm that down. She will appreciate, I hope, that to clarify, as she has requested on some of the reports, and she made reference obviously to reports of Indian planes having been shot down over the last 24 hours. I don't want, and I hope she will understand why I don't want to be drawn into comment on this, because it is a fluid situation. Many of these reports are unconfirmed, and therefore, I think the most important thing, as I say, is to try and produce a slightly calmer approach. If I may just say on the issue of travel advice that she also requested, we are very closely monitoring the situation, and we shall keep our travel advice under constant review and update regularly, not just in the Kashmir, but obviously in other countries. And I should perhaps say, if I may, to the Honourable Lady, I am going to be in the region, as it happens, on a long pre-arranged trip, provided we can get out of this place with Brexit votes. Anyway, later on, I'm hoping to go tomorrow morning for 3 days to India, and obviously this is an issue that is fast-moving, and I will speak not just with our High Commissioner out in New Delhi, but obviously with counterparts both there and in Mumbai.
Mr. Bob Blackman.
Mr. Speaker, I congratulate the Honourable Lady for gaining this urgent question on this very tense position. Can I thank the Minister for his solid answers thus far? And clearly the escalating tension emanates from this terrorist suicide attack by Jaish-e-Mohammed on the 14th of February. This group are based in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir and in Pakistan. So clearly the answer to this is that Pakistan has to take action to dismantle the terrorist camps and organise so that the terrorists are brought to justice. So will my honourable friend tell the Pakistani High Commission to own up to their responsibilities and make sure that the terrorists face justice?
Listen, I have a lot of respect for my honourable friend who takes a great interest in these issues. However, I think he is making some categorical statements that are not entirely supportable at this point. And as I say, I think it is important for all of us as members of Parliament with significant diaspora, and I know that it is predominantly obviously Indian diaspora in his own Harrow East constituency, but with all of us to try and calm feelings and try and de-escalate some of the concerns, not least as this is a fast-moving situation. I think it is fair to say, however, that Jaish-e-Mohammed have claimed responsibility for the 14th of February attack. The UK will continue to support a listing of that organisation and indeed its leader, Masood Azhar, under the UN Security Council Resolution 1267. The organisation itself has been listed since 2001 by the UN, and Masood Azhar is the head of that organisation. But I think it is very premature to start making categorical statements about any involvement by Pakistan in this issue. And obviously we will keep this under review, and I will endeavour to speak, as I say, with both the Indian and Pakistani High Commissioners this afternoon to ask them for any updates on the situation.
Emily Thornberry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question. And I'd like to thank the member for Oldham East and Saddleworth for securing it, and the members for Bradford West and Bolton South East, who I also know sought an urgent question today as well. At the outset, let me begin by making it quite clear that we condemn the despicable terror attack carried out in Pulwama on February the 14th, and I believe that we speak on behalf of the whole House when we do so. India has been absolutely right to take action against the terrorist group responsible and to urge Pakistan to follow suit. It is also high time that China lifted its veto so the UN can designate the head of JEM as a global terrorist. But will the Minister also join me in urging the Indian authorities at national and regional level to protect those innocent civilians of Kashmiri origin who have faced reprisals across India following the Pulwama attack? In terms of airstrikes and dogfights of the last 2 days, will the Minister of State join me in calling for immediate talks between India and Pakistan to de-escalate that crisis, but in also urging them to put an immediate stop to any military activity that risks escalating it further? We have heard both sides claim that their actions have simply been designed to send a message. But it is all too easy in those situations for messages to be misinterpreted and for grave and fatal mistakes to be made. Finally, Mr. Speaker, will the Minister of State join me in asking both India and Pakistan to think first and foremost of the innocent people of Kashmir, who are literally caught in the middle of this crossfire and have been so for 70 years. Their human rights have been serially abused, their humanitarian needs have been neglected, their own wishes and about their own future have been treated as unimportant. No one in India, Pakistan or in this country wants yet another generation of Kashmiri children growing up facing the same cycle of instability, violence and fear that has afflicted their parents and their grandparents for decades. Only peaceful dialogue can break that cycle, and all parties must commit to engage in that dialogue.
May I thank the Right Honourable Lady, and I believe she's absolutely right that we absolutely want to see a broad-based dialogue. I think she's right. The whole House condemned the original attack that took place on the 14th of February. I have to say, obviously, the concern that one has about the China's veto obviously is not, unfortunately, isolated to issues around Kashmir. There are other areas, not least in relation to the Rohingya population from Burma, which, as she well knows, that the prospect, at least, of a veto and of a lack of cooperation doesn't make life easy within the UN Security Council. And, of course, there are other organisations, such as the European Union and indeed the UN Human Rights Council, where we will try to utilise as much of the muscle that we can, again, in collaboration with other countries, to try to bring about the peaceable progress to which she refers. Mr. Speaker, if I can just touch on the issue that she did also raise in relation to the humanitarian situation. We recognise there are and have been long-standing human rights concerns in both India and Pakistan administered Kashmir. We believe that any allegation of human rights abuses is of great concern and has to be investigated thoroughly, promptly and transparently. I'd like to reassure that the House, as I did actually with a number of members here who were at the meeting of the APPG, which we had on the 23rd of January, that we do and will obviously continue to raise the issue of Kashmir, including human rights, at all opportunities with the governments of both India and Pakistan. But again, I would reiterate her words, and I think it is very important for us, with the importance of the diaspora that we have here, to make very clear that, as she rightly says, the worst of all worlds would be for many more decades ahead of the deprivation and humanitarian problems in Kashmir. We owe it in whatever way we can. And as I say, I do think that to intervene or interfere, to try and mediate in a broader way isn't necessarily the role for the United Kingdom. I think the role is, not least because of the diaspora here, to try and at least try and present there should be and must be a better future for future generations of Kashmiris. The last 70 years, obviously, we need, I think, to focus more attention rather on the past, but on a future. And I very much hope that one of the ways in which our own diaspora here can make a contribution is to try and help build up industry, to provide some prosperity for future generations of Kashmiris.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful that my honourable friend is here in the chamber today responding to this urgent question, an important question from the honourable member for Oldham, Saddleworth. I'm very concerned, as many of us are, of the issues that have seen such violence in the region of Kashmir over the past few weeks. Would my honourable friend at least, though not playing a part as a negotiator or mediator, which I understand, do his best work in getting around the General Assembly of the UN and other members of the Security Council in encouraging those who are friends of both countries to help them get together and talk, at least in the margins of conversations, at least in the quiet corridors, so that when they get to the actual talks, there is a conversation to be had? And would he also ensure that those members of the UK population who have connections to Kashmir are able to support their families and support those who may have been cut off or in any way harmed by the economic shocks that will be affecting those in the region at the moment?
We shall do our level best. I think my honourable friend, I think, is absolutely right when he says that within the corridors of both New York and Geneva, there will be, I think, some very active conversations taking place. I should perhaps say, I think it is beyond simply friends of Pakistan and India. The realisation is that this is an extremely serious situation. Two nuclear powers in that part of the world, and it is therefore in everyone's interest to see as much of a de-escalation, but also, I think, with an eye towards trying to solve some of the underlying problems for the longer-term future. Can I just, if I may, just also, not least because the man to my right has a large Kashmiri population, and it is unfortunately the want of being a government whip that you don't have a chance to say very much. And I am well aware that my honourable I'm sure that you are looking forward, Mr. Speaker, to the day when I get elevated or demoted maybe to the whip size. We don't know when one looks at it for that reason. No, but on a serious note, I'm well aware that my honourable friend for Pendle, not least with one of the main towns in his constituency, Nelson, having a significant Kashmiri population, I know does a huge amount of work, and I know that applies to many members on all sides of the House.
And Douglas Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and also thanks to the honourable member for Oldham East and Saddleworth for raising this important issue today. I'd also like to thank the Minister for his measured response to the situation to date. But the House will be concerned about the rise in conflict in this region, especially where the nations involved have access to nuclear weapons. Will the Minister ensure that the serious concerns raised in this House are relayed directly to the governments of Pakistan and India and at the highest level, and that the Foreign Office strain every sinew to make sure that both parties act with responsibility and restraint, and to insist that escalation is not an option? And finally, I think that many members have mentioned about positive and meaningful talks taking place, and I think in order to protect the civilian populations on both sides of the border and indeed within Kashmir, we need to ensure that these populations are not put at any further risk. And I know the government are focused on other matters at the moment, but I would also hope that the Minister or Foreign Secretary would be able to keep us up to date with developments on a regular basis. Thank you.
Thank the honourable gentleman for his very constructive words. I mean, he is right. I mean, obviously, this requires a very nimble diplomatic approach. I have to say I've been encountered in the last 2 mornings a blizzard of diplomatic telegrams from Islamabad, from New Delhi, and indeed, of course, from New York, to recognise the huge amount of work that is going in from our diplomatic service and trying to keep lines of communication open and trying to speak to individuals, both within the military but also, of course, at a political level. We will do our level best, obviously, as this situation does evolve and we are able to say more with more certainty to ensure that the House is kept fully informed.
The Honourable Gentleman, the member for Broadland, has just entered the chamber and is carrying with him, as per usual, a book. I note in passing something of which the Honourable Gentleman will be well aware, and that is that in his party, and what used to be my party, it was frequently said that to be seen carrying a book was dangerous, but to be seen reading it was fatal. Steve Baker.
Speaker, and I absolutely condemn the perpetrators of the initial act of violence, but I also condemn airstrikes in retaliation for what really could have been a crime, not an act of war. Thousands of my constituents will be alarmed about the prospect of escalation because they have families on not just one but both sides of the line of control. Will he join me in saying to the evil people who perpetrate acts of violence in political causes that they defeat their own ends by the revulsion and the horror that they cause?
I thank my honourable friend for Wycombe, and I know full well that he has a significant Kashmiri population in his own constituency, not least because I've had a chance to meet them only in recent weeks. No, he's absolutely right. It is entirely self-defeating, and in many ways, what all of us want to see is some sort of normalcy within the Kashmir area, whether it is under Pakistani or Indian administration. But above all, the clearest way that would happen is if there is stability in that region, which will allow for economic prosperity. And one only has to look closer to hand, looking at our own situation in Northern Ireland. It was when the worst of the troubles of the 1970s and 80s were behind us that we were able to see some progress. We saw international investors feeling comfortable at being able to build businesses in that Northern Ireland country. And I think this is the great prize if we can de-escalate some of these long-standing issues within Kashmir.
Yasmin Qureshi.
Mr. Speaker, until his election, Prime Minister Modi was banned from entering the United Kingdom for his part in the Gujarat massacre, which resulted in over 2,000 Muslim deaths. As a Prime Minister, he has pursued a divisive, right-wing Hindu nationalist agenda that has inflamed tensions both in India and occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So instead of pointing fingers at Pakistan for the Pulwama attack, when will he look at his own record of persistent state violence, gross human rights abuses, as highlighted by the UN and the APBG on Kashmir, which has caused the rising of the homegrown insurgency in Kashmir? Hear, hear.
I understand the heartfelt passion of the Honourable Lady, and let me just say this. It isn't relevant to this present situation. However, we all know that we are in a pre-election period within India, and that is one of the factors that obviously is a concern. And it's one of the reasons we want to see a de-escalation of this at the earliest possible opportunity to avoid any of the sort of issues to which she refers. But I think it is important that we, again, she will appreciate from the perspective of the Foreign Office that we want to remain strong friends on all sides, and to start condemning in the way in which she proposes, I think would only undermine our position in it, trying to bring both sides together.
Mrs. Theresa Villiers.
Can I ask that the government recognises the severity of the terrorist threat faced by India in relation to Kashmir, and that our government offers support where the Indian government takes measures that it feels are necessary to protect the security of its citizens?
Let me say to my right honourable friend, we will offer support to all governments that look to protect their civilian populations, but doing so in a way that is managed, that it is manageable, that is obviously not focused on an overreaction to what has happened. And whilst I appreciate, she rightly says, that the attack on the 14th of February was one of the very worst single episodes going back for some decades, equally we would like to see a restraint on both sides, recognising the importance of trying to have a secure region, but also to ensure that civilian populations are properly protected.
Now, Shah.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just last week I returned from leading a delegation from the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association to Pakistan, during which I met with the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister assured the delegation of his commitment, reiterating wanting to have a peaceful resolution through diplomacy. I'm sure the Minister is aware that the central issue in all of this crisis is the issue of Kashmir, and until the people of Kashmir are not given their right to self-determination, nor will they be free, nor can we truly expect to see long-term peace between India and Pakistan. So will the Minister agree with me that now is the time to change our policy position on Kashmir and play a central role in helping resolve the issue that we played a part in creating when leaving the region as a colonial power? And will he also consider making an application to the United Nations Security Council with regards to this?
I must say, and the Honourable Lady will recognise that I don't agree with her prescription that we should try and intervene. I mean, the reality of the situation, as I'm sure she's well aware, is if the UK government were to offer to try to mediate or to feel that it's our place to interfere, we would simply lose credibility, particularly with the Indian government, and therefore we would end up not being able to play the role that we do in trying to see a de-escalation of tensions. Our long-standing position is and must continue to be that for India and Pakistan have to find that political resolution to the situation in Kashmir through their own efforts, taking into account, obviously, the wishes, as she rightly says, of Kashmiri people. If we interfere, or prescribe a solution or purport that we can be somehow a mediator, I think it will very much undermine our position on all sides.
Well, I was going to call the honourable gentleman the member for Wycombe, but he now seems very preoccupied with his... Oh, well, we've already heard the fellow. Oh, I shouldn't have forgotten so quickly. Anyway, I'll remind myself of the eloquence of his contribution in due course. Shailesh, Vara.
Speaker, the Minister is taking a very fine line and trying to sit on the fence, effectively, mindful that there are diaspora from both Pakistan and India living in this country, and he is treading a very fine line as he progresses with his answers. However, may I say to him that where it is abundantly clear that the terrorists are living in one particular country, then can he give an undertaking to this House that the British government will make it absolutely clear to that host country that they should not be tolerating those terrorists who are engaging in activity in another country, and that they will face the full force of law?
My honourable friend will recognise that as a diplomat and as a Foreign Office Minister, sometimes the most effective way to make an argument to our counterparts is not through megaphone diplomacy. There are robust private conversations that will take place, and I don't want to go into detail as to what they say, but let me just say this. Clearly, we do understand there is a need and a desire for any country to act, but to act proportionately to secure its borders, to secure its people and indeed its military. But I think the idea that the UK should be robustly being seen to be on one side of this battle rather than another would actually be entirely self-defeating, and I think it is in the interest of us all to have a calm approach. Of course, we do not, will not in any way do anything other than criticise terrorist organisations. It's one of the reasons why the organisation Jaish-e-Mohammed for almost 20 years has been subject to a UN listing and has been prescribed in the UK for that period of time.
Profuse apologies to the honourable gentleman member for Wycombe, on whose every word, as he knows, I ordinarily hang. My attention was momentarily distracted, but I apologise to him. Faisal Rashid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I must express my grave concern and alarm over the ongoing escalation of the conflict between India and Pakistan in disputed Kashmir. War will benefit no one, least of all the people of Kashmir. But as of yet, there are no signs of a serious, and I emphasize on a serious international attempt to put an end to this crisis. Does the Minister agree that the international community must do more and act now to put an end to these senseless acts of military violence? And if so, what steps will his government be taking to achieve this outcome?
May I thank the honourable gentleman for Bedford. I mean, I accept that, and I mentioned earlier on, that we are clearly working as rapidly as we can within all international organisations. And if I may just to touch on the point that I didn't answer earlier on about the UN, clearly we are working within the UN. This is a major issue, not least because of the fact that there are two nuclear powers here at stake, and I suspect that there will be a move to try and escalate as far as de-escalate negotiations as far as possible. And I know from discussions with our US counterparts that they obviously are also expressing certain concerns there. But ultimately, I do believe it must be for the Kashmiri people to find a way forward here. And I appreciate that there's a lot of history and a lot of things, and the worry is a lot of things can be said, a lot of things can be done now that can be very difficult to forget, and therefore we have to have the eye of the prize of the future, I think, is to try and have a more peaceable solution. But ultimately it must come from the hearts of those who are in Kashmir, whether of Pakistani or Indian origin.
Victoria Prentis.
Mr. Speaker, just like the Honourable Member for Wycombe, I too have many thousands of constituents who are very worried about family members in Kashmir. I was heartened by what the Minister of State had to say about his robust conversations about human rights with both sides. Would he agree with me that there is perhaps more that we can do as a nation to help investigate human rights abuses and ensure that truth is brought to the forefront rather than the great deal of misinformation that we're hearing at the moment?
Yes, I very much agree with what my honourable friend for Banbury says. She will be aware that any allegations of human rights abuses are concerning and need to be investigated thoroughly, promptly and transparently. She will also be aware that our single biggest DFID budget is in Pakistan, and obviously issues around human rights concerns are part and parcel of the money that is spent out there, and trying to build up capacity and capability to ensure that those sort of human rights issues are properly dealt with.
Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The whole House will support the government and the United Nations in its efforts to get India and Pakistan to draw back from further conflict. But does the Minister agree with me that it is the people of Kashmir who are both the victims and spectators to their own future because of the failure of those two countries to reach an agreement about what will happen, and that the people of Kashmir want, above all else, the chance to live in peace and in security, and to have the right to determine their own future, as they were promised, of course, when it was suggested that a referendum might be held over 70 years ago, which of course has never taken place.
I'm not sure I'd recommend a referendum on anyone, actually, in the current circumstances, and certainly I don't think for the UK to do so would be wise in those circumstances. No, but the right honourable gentleman makes a very serious point. It's a very, very fair point. We do continue to raise the issues of human rights, and as you say, to look at it in the humanitarian sense. Can I also say, actually, just slightly adding to the responses to one or two other contributions made earlier on, we noted the findings of the UN Office of the High Commission for Human Rights reports, and are particularly concerned about allegations of human rights abuses and violations in both Indian and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. And can I make clear that we will and continue to raise these issues with the government in New Delhi.
Andrew Griffiths.
Mr. Speaker, and can I draw the House's attention to my register of interests? As the former chairman of the parliamentary group on Kashmir, I visited the region. Mr. Speaker, many of my constituents, many thousands of constituents, are concerned for family, friends and loved ones in the region, and I have and they've contacted me to raise their concerns. Will the Minister agree with me that this is worrying on two levels? First of all, because we have two nuclear powers squaring off against each other, but secondly, because the people on the ground in Kashmir are the ones that are suffering. Given that we've heard of the documented evidence of human rights abuses, does he not agree with me that it might be the right course of action for us to send observers, maybe with our EU colleagues, in order to make sure there are no human rights abuses on the ground in Kashmir?
I thank my honourable friend. I know he's also a former officer of the all-party beer group, and I wonder whether that was the interest that he was going to express today. But no, again, he makes a serious point about having observers, whether at the EU level or indeed at the United Nations level. And I think that we will do our best, our level best, to try and ensure that, particularly obviously as this situation develops, that the international community have a chance to see what is going on the ground in order to de-escalate the tensions.
Stella Creasy.
Speaker, further to the answer that the Minister has just given, he set out today his fears of somehow being seen to take sides. Let me tell him the community in Walthamstow that are desperately concerned about the situation in Kashmir want him to stay on the side of human rights. He said there about the importance of the work that the UN could do in investigating these causes. He's also told us he's going to have phone calls this afternoon with both the Pakistan and the Indian representatives. Will he commit now to raising directly the importance of them allowing the UN to go to the region and investigate, so that finally, when we talk about allegations, we can show the truth and the people of Kashmir can have our justice?
May I thank the honourable lady for Walthamstow. I would be only too happy to commit to making that that pledge, as it were, within the telephone calls I'm having later on this afternoon. When I say not taking sides, of course we take the side we take is obviously with the people of Kashmir, and indeed to try and ensure that lives that have been so blighted can thrive. The danger, as I say, with being seen to take a side on this issue is that we will lose any leverage or any credibility with one or other of the governments concerned. We're well aware that obviously there's a large diaspora in this country, and it's not just simply because there's a diaspora here. This is actually doing the right thing as well. But these human rights issues are clearly of grave concern. And as I say, I will commit in my conversations, not just today, but in the days to come, to ensure that the voice that she's put across. I'm amazed I'm so popular. It's great to see. But I will ensure that the voice is properly heard.
Opposition members' concern, I may say to the Minister, is for the knee muscles of government backbenchers boinging up and down in eager expectation of their opportunity to be called. Mr Raymond Chishti.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Apart from being the chair of the all-party parliamentary group on Pakistan, I say to the Minister, I was born in Kashmir, and in 2005, in the earthquake, I lost 25 relatives, including my grandfather. And Muzaffarabad is very near the line of control. And what I say to the Minister is this: people of Kashmir want peace, prosperity, human dignity, and to be masters of their own destiny. And that, when the Minister says our long-standing position, is in line with the United Nations Resolution 1948, 47 and 39, which the United Kingdom signed up to, saying we will support the people of Kashmir to have their right to self-determination. With that being the case, can the Minister please push for that at the United Nations, including what other colleagues have said, have a United Nations human rights fact-finding mission, and whatever they say, whoever they find against, in the India or Pakistani side, we will all accept it. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
I thank my honourable friend for his comments. As I say, we are and do note the findings of the UN Office of the High Commission for Human Rights with its reports, which are deeply concerning, and we will make sure these are brought up in international community, both in New York and, of course, in Geneva.
Chris Leslie.
The attack in Srinagar was absolutely atrocious, and now the prospect of descending into a tit-for-tat exchange is immensely depressing. This is, as he knows, an incredibly serious issue, and as the former chair of the all-party parliamentary group on Kashmir, last year we published our own report and inquiry into the human rights situation. He knows because he heard a recent presentation on that. I hear what he says about government policy, but we have a responsibility to help support confidence-building measures. We have a legacy responsibility in that region of the world, and I think the UK does have an obligation to lead and show the way forward for human rights and peace in this area.
I take on board what the honourable gentleman has said, and I would support the idea that there is a leadership role, not least within the UN Security Council, where clearly long-standing connections between the UK and both India and Pakistan will be brought to bear. Let me just say this, if I may. We will continue to be in the closest possible contact at senior level in both India and Pakistan to try and avoid escalation and to ensure regional stability. Part of that, obviously, is the capacity building to which he referred, and I think he will understand that obviously quite a lot of work goes on in both India and Pakistan to try and ensure that it is brought to bear to hopefully make lives better for all concerned.
Mr. Philip Dunn. Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend has referred to the discussions and channels that are being used through diplomatic routes, both of the UN and directly, and I think it's very fortuitous that he happens to be visiting the region in the next few days. Could he, before he goes, also engage with the Ministry of Defence to encourage senior military leaders and ministers to engage with their counterparts in both India and Pakistan to make sure that there are the kind of senior level military to military back channels between those two armed forces so that they can help to avoid the accidental escalation of conflict?
I thank my right honourable friend for his comments. He, of course, was a defence minister and will understand that indeed those back channels do exist, and clearly they are not always entirely avowed, but they exist with both the Indian and Pakistani military, and I'm well aware that conversations have already taken place and no doubt will continue apace.
Ruth Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This is the latest chapter in a horrendous story for the people of Kashmir. Can I, and I'm sure the whole House agrees, but can I ask the Minister what efforts is he making to ensure that day-to-day communication with the diaspora community are ongoing so they know what's happening to their friends and family in Kashmir?
Listen, I very much understand the concerns that she raised. No, it is a very confused picture at the moment, and I wish we could confirm more of what is happening on the ground. And part of the reason that I've not been able to be as expansive as I would like to be is that there simply are obviously conflicting reports of what is happening. Obviously, we will do our level best to ensure that that many of the diaspora who obviously must be increasingly worried about the well-being of their own relatives close at hand are kept as informed as is possible in the circumstances, and I will make sure when I'm in the region that we express those very, very closely.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable member for Oldham East and Saddleworth for securing this urgent question. Like many honourable members, I have a significant community of Kashmiris in my constituency who are extremely concerned. I'm also the Senior Vice Chair of the APPG for Kashmir. Would my right honourable friend the Minister agree with me that we must condemn the use of violence and abuse of human rights wherever it occurs and by all parties in Kashmir?
I agree entirely, and we do and will continue to do so.
Tamhanjit Singh Des.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Those of us of South Asian ancestry were overjoyed recently with the opening of the Indo-Pak border, a historic and commendable decision by both governments, so that Sikhs and others could pay homage at the final resting place of the founder of the Sikh faith. We had hoped that there would be further border openings, but simultaneously we expressed concern that terrorist attacks or abuse of human rights would once again sow the seeds of hatred and division. Would the Minister agree with me that we need to impress upon both nations the need to urgently de-escalate tensions, and that we need to work with them to find lasting and sustainable peace for the long-suffering but wonderful Kashmiri people?
May I thank the Honourable Gentleman for Slough, who always speaks with such calmness about these sorts of matters, and there are a number of issues, both in ministerial but at a constituency level, where I've had strong dealings with him, and no, I would entirely endorse what he's had to say. I mean, I think we all want to see a regularisation of the situation and as much access as possible for both those who are currently living in India and currently in Pakistan to be able to go to homelands that their forefathers lived in.
Zach Goldsmith.
Mr. Speaker, I declare an interest as a friend, an admirer, and as a former relative of the new Prime Minister of Pakistan. Does my honourable friend agree with me, share my view, that everything we've seen so far from the new Prime Minister demonstrate an absolute commitment to tackling extremism and terrorism? And does he agree with the new Prime Minister's words shortly after he was elected that the surest route to peace between India and Pakistan in the long term is by increasing and expanding the trade movements between the two countries?
I could not agree more, and I had a chance actually to meet Imran Khan when at that time he was regarded as being a sort of a potential kingmaker when I visited KP, the region where his party were strongest back in 2017. And obviously he has arrived at a pivotal time in India-Pakistan relations, as I say, with an imminent Indian election and, of course, with all of the financial issues concerning Pakistan that have inevitably taken up quite a lot of his time in his first few months as Prime Minister. But, yes, his rhetoric has always been in favour of peace, but also that recognition that having the broadest range of friends across the world is the surest way of seeing prosperity and normalcy in all parts of Pakistan.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps the point that we can have agreement on across the House is, as we sit here today, the drums of war beat once more between two nuclear powers. And surely we must now, in this House, realise our ethical, moral and historical duty to help provide peace and stability in that region. And the central issue that has been said by honourable members is Kashmir. And the voice that has gone unheard for over 70 years is the sons and daughters of Kashmir, who in the face of oppression, violence and persecution continue to look towards this House for justice. So, Minister, now is the time to move away from gesture politics and towards finding a concrete resolution, fulfilling our international obligations to actively support the birthright of the sons and daughters of Kashmir, which is self-determination.
Can I just very gently say, and I say it in a convivial spirit to the honourable gentleman, that the erudition of his inquiry was equalled only by its length, and that has been emblematic of the exchanges on this urgent question. Nodding assent to which is provided by the right honourable gentleman member for New Forest West. It would be pity if we took an hour on an urgent question with only about 30 inquisitors. That really shouldn't happen. Minister.
I think he is suggesting that I'm at least 50% to blame for that as well. So let me just say to him, I respect deeply the passion that the honourable gentleman for Bradford has. He will know, and I hope he doesn't feel that there's gesture politics involved here. We are going to do our level best to try and bring parties together. And, you know, whilst I've always said, you know, there's a set policy that we will not have an official mediation. Please be assured, you know, we are doing our level best to try and bring people together. And I think the one message I would say to him is that we need to try and de-escalate and calm some of the passions that we will see within our own country in the weeks and months ahead. It is in the interests not just of all Kashmiris, but I think the interests of stability here within the UK as well.
Mr. Marcus Jones.
Mr. Speaker, over decades, people have been subjected to violence, oppression and human rights abuses in Kashmir. With the events of recent weeks, that is only going to compound the challenges and divide people more rather than bring a solution in Kashmir. Can my honourable friend do all that he can, and can the government do all that they can, to use the UK influence to bring dialogue between India and Pakistan to try and prevent the escalation of these issues and the terrorism that's going on, so that we can start again to focus more on dealing with the issue of how Kashmir determines itself?
Thank my honourable friend. He will be aware we are trying to do our level best precisely along the lines that he has suggested. And can I just say this to the House? I mean, it's interesting whenever I speak to many of the Indian and indeed Pakistani constituents in my own constituency, they are often marvel at the fact that I've had a chance. My very first visit to India back in 2003, I went to both Srinagar and to Jammu. And the tragedy in many ways, this is a beautiful part of the world. It would have tremendous opportunities, not just in tourism, but it would be an amazing place for many, many with Kashmir at their hearts to try to visit. And I think, again, this is a great prize, to try and ensure that things are normalised. And we know this is a very painstaking approach of diplomacy that is going to require that, but to normalise for the beauty of that part of the world to become obvious to many, many people.
Julie Cooper.
Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Minister's focus on the human rights of the people of Kashmir. This is genuinely welcome. But the fact remains that the humanitarian crisis has been raging in Kashmir for decades, largely ignored by this country and the rest of the world. And despite the fact that members across this House on all sides have repeatedly asked for us to take a leading role, bringing diplomatic peace talks to the forefront, does he agree with me that this is a terrible shame that it takes an escalation of violence from two nuclear powers to achieve what hopefully will be a wake-up call for the British government?
I'm sorry to say that it's a wake-up call. This is something that it is close to all of our hearts, not least because there are a significant number of diaspora and their members of Parliament who raise these issues, whether in parliamentary questions or indeed in urgent questions such as the one we're having today, and indeed through the APPG, which I know she attended only a few weeks ago. I think what is particularly serious here, let's be candid about it, it goes back to one or two of the other contributions, the fact that we now are dealing with two nuclear powers. The issues of Kashmir haven't been a nuclear-to-nuclear state, other than, of course, the last 25 or 30 years since Pakistan acquired a nuclear capability. So this is why it is of particular seriousness. But that isn't to say that a huge amount of work hasn't been going on behind the scenes for many years. But obviously it becomes more high-profile with all that is happening now.
Robert Court. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that the Minister won't want to comment upon the claim and counterclaim around aircraft being shot down and around the specifics of pilots having been captured, but would he perhaps agree that the chances of a calm dialogue between the parties will be much increased if treatment of each other's personnel is seen to be humane?
I entirely agree, and obviously, as I say, I can't speculate on other than on the reports that have come through, and I won't go into any great detail on that, but I very much hope that if there are military captured on either or both sides, that they will be dealt and treated with within the Geneva Convention and in a humane way.
Jim McMahon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think any fair-minded person is expecting the government to take the side of Pakistan or India, but we are absolutely expecting the government to step up and give a voice to the people in Kashmir. You know, in the pursuit of power by aggression, it's always everyday people who pay the ultimate price, and there are too many people that have had their lives on hold for generations. And this matters to people in Oldham, West and Warrington, with a large heritage in that country. And when this happens, it's their parents, their sons, their daughters, their brothers and their sisters, and they're just reaching out to the UK government to say, give us a hand, bring people together, convene, and to use that leadership role in a positive way.
Thank the honourable gentleman for Oldham, West and Warrington, and you know, we will do all that we can along the lines that I've suggested. And this is a very fluid situation. Obviously, the most important aspect at the moment is to try and de-escalate these tensions, because they are at a very worrying level. But he's right to point out there are underlying issues that also need to be dealt with in the future.
Tracy Brabin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've all been really appalled by this terrorist attack. And as has been said, communities like ours across the country are deeply concerned, and many in Batley and Spen have family and friends. I actually, Mr. Speaker, have a member of staff currently trying to get into the region to attend a family wedding. But would the Minister agree that any reprisals taken against entirely innocent Kashmiri civilians elsewhere in India must stop? And will the Minister make clear to his Indian counterparts that whilst we understand their anger, they must ensure innocent people are not harmed when responding to this horrific attack?
I should be very happy to express those direct concerns when I speak to the Indian High Commissioner later today.
Kate Green.
May I echo the comments of colleagues that because of our history in the region and because of our influence and close relationship with both India and Pakistan, Kashmiri families in my constituency do look to the UK to take a leading role both in the immediate and dangerous conflict that we see before us now and in bringing long-term peace, justice and freedom to Kashmir.
May I thank the Honourable Lady. She will appreciate, I'm sorry, but just covering the same old ground. And I well understand that each and every member here, for a range of reasons, often because of diaspora, but often as well because they have a great passion for the relations between India and Pakistan, wants to have their say. I suspect there's very little new that I can add, but may I thank the Honourable Lady for her words.
Afzal Khan.
We all condemn all form of terrorism, and I think we all also understand that war is not an option. Many of us have raised this matter multiple times in Britain, in this Parliament, however, have raised the same response from government time and time again. This is an issue between India and Pakistan. However, recent events reveal this issue is not just between India and Pakistan. It desperately requires international attention. The British government needs to facilitate talks and play a greater role in de-escalating the dangerous level of tension between the two countries. I would like the government actually to do more at the UN level and to have an international investigation with what has happened and also move towards the core issue, and that is the issue of Kashmir.
May I thank the Honourable Gentleman for Her Majesty Gorton. He always speaks with in a very measured tone, which I think is the important thing for all of our constituents going forward. Please be assured, that a lot of work has already happened in the last fortnight since the latest phase of escalation at the United Nations, and obviously it is a great worry to see the events of the last couple of days and obviously the concern about what may come to pass. A huge amount of work is going on behind the scenes diplomatically. The UK has an important part, but by no means an exclusive part to play at the United Nations, and we shall continue to bring that to bear.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My constituent, Madni Ahmed Tahir, is amongst many constituents with Kashmiri roots in my Glasgow Central constituency and has family in Kashmir. Can he advise and give a bit more detail on what travel advice will be offered to my constituents, and what considerations will his colleagues in the Home Office be making on visa applications that are currently in progress?
Obviously, she will recognise visa applications are a matter directly for the Home Office, but clearly there will be liaison between the two departments. We are closely monitoring the situation in relation to travel advice. Obviously, that is being monitored literally on an hour-by-hour basis as we become aware of confirmation of what is happening on the ground. We shall keep that advice under constant review and will update it on the website regularly.
Paula Sheriff.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. At the risk of repeating other colleagues, we constantly hear of human rights violations in occupied Kashmir. So to that end, we cannot be bystanders. And what efforts is the Minister specifically making to ensure that a thorough, transparent inquiry into these crimes is commissioned?
The Honourable Lady for Dewsbury will be aware, obviously, that the UN Office of the High Commission for Human Rights has had a recent report. She'll forgive me if, rather than trying to say something on the floor of the House, I will try and write to her, if I may, in response, to give a list of the actions that have been taken over the past 12 months and what we're proposing to do in the months to come.
Mohammed Yassin.
I must say I'm very disappointed with the Minister's response so far, because his government is failing to take the responsibility. This is far more serious issue than his government and he thinks. Tensions are high, and both countries, the nuclear countries, on the verge of another conflict. And the Kashmiris are dying since 1947. Will his government take some real action and show some responsibility and bring both India and Pakistan on the table so they can resolve their issues through the dialogues?
I would refer to my previous answers on this matter, and I should perhaps say that this is an issue that successive governments clearly have tried to work together on a bilateral basis, which I think has been more helpful. A huge amount of work goes on. These are very important, our High Commissions in both New Delhi and in Islamabad, and I know the High Commissioners themselves and other staff work closely together to try to do what we can on the ground in Kashmir. But as I've said at the outset, it really isn't our role to bring both parties to the table in the way that he suggests. And in trying to do so, I think it would be entirely counterproductive.
Eloquence and brevity combined. Mike Gapes.
Mr Speaker, whilst we should not exaggerate the influence that the British government could have at this time, isn't it nevertheless important that as a nuclear weapons state, we do what Jack Straw did in 1999 during the Kargil crisis, where the role of the British Foreign Office was central in ensuring that that didn't escalate into an all-out nuclear war.
Very good point.
I think the Honourable Gentleman for Ilford South is right. Clearly, the issue about being a nuclear state makes this particularly serious at the moment. One of the reasons why I think the international community will want to have a part to play. I would be happy to speak with him, if I may, because he clearly has some knowledge from his time and an interest in foreign affairs at that time. And if he feels there are important lessons from what happened 20 years ago that we could bring to bear on this crisis, I would be happy to speak with him further.
Darren Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I should declare my interest as the recently appointed co-chair of Labour Friends of India. The Minister has spoken today about the direct involvement of the government with embassies and through the United Nations Security Council. But could he set out today what work the Commonwealth should be doing in trying to ensure stability in the region?
Now, I think one of the most important things that the Commonwealth can do, and I'm sure that the Secretary-General of the Commonwealth will have this very much in her own mind, is this idea of bringing people together, being able to keep lines of communication open. And obviously, he will be well aware that leading figures in the Commonwealth in both India and Pakistan will have had a political or indeed an NGO-related background, trying to keep as many lines of communication open. We want to try and have as much dialogue as is possible in these very trying circumstances.
Yes. Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for his deep interest in this matter. As chair of the APPG and Pakistan Religious Minorities, I visited Pakistan in September of last year as part of a cross-party delegation to inquire and examine human rights and persecution of Christians and religious minorities. That delegation met the regional president of Pakistan Kashmir province, who made us aware of attacks and killings of Pakistan Kashmirians, including the sexual abuse and rape of Pakistan Kashmir women. The President stated to us that the UN has a key role to play. So what discussions has the Minister had with the UN to make a peaceful process move forward?
The discussions at the moment have taken place at the UN with our head of mission there as regards this current issue. If you will forgive me, rather than try to give a glib and quick answer here, I will perhaps try to write him in detail about precisely what has happened in recent months on this matter.
Alex Norris.
The Kashmiri diaspora make an extraordinary contribution across our communities, and nowhere more so than in Nottingham. They will understand, as I do, the Minister's reluctance to, as he puts it, pick a side. But will he be absolutely clear with the House and make a solemn commitment that when it comes to working through international organisations, especially the UN, when it comes to human rights, when it comes to humanitarian aid, the British government will not be found wanting?
I very much hope that he will feel reassured that that is very much the British government's approach. And I think it is actually very important, not just in relation to this urgent question, but within the work of APPGs, we need to work together on this, and I hope we can work across Parliament, because I think it will be an even stronger voice if we can speak as one. And then, of course, there will be, at the margins, there will be disagreements, but if we can speak as one for Kashmir and Kashmiri people, it makes, I think, all the more effective a voice in dealing with both our Indian and Pakistani counterparts.
Gareth Snow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I've heard what the Minister has said this afternoon about not wishing to be seen to take a side, that he doesn't believe it is the UK's role to bring together the Indian and Pakistan sides to form a compromise. But as was pointed out by my honourable friend from Oldham, West and Royton, what the Kashmiri community both here and in Kashmir are looking for is a friend and ally who will speak up for them in the international forum. So could I ask the Minister what specific actions he is going to be taking inside the UN to make sure that the UN fulfils its responsibilities to speak up for that minority community?
I would not wish the Honourable Gentleman for Stoke to misunderstand the situation. We are a friend for all Kashmiris, and we will be a friend of that region, and indeed a strong friend of both India and Pakistan internationally on this and related issues. It is a fluid situation at the moment, and therefore I can't really go into great specifics at the UN other than to say that there are feverish conversations taking place there, albeit to try and have a sense of calm as well to be instilled. And clearly, I'm sure that this is a matter that will be formally dealt with both at the UN General Assembly as well as at the Security Council in the days to come.
Stevens.
Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister of Kashmir was in Glasgow last weekend discussing with a cross-party group of political representatives in Glasgow about the situation in Kashmir. The Prime Minister of Kashmir is in London today because he can't return home because of closed airspace. So will the Minister meet him today? He's going to be in Parliament from 4 o'clock onwards, I understand, to hear directly from the directly representative of the Kashmiri people.
He refers to the Prime Minister of Kashmir. Obviously, we will deal at the Foreign Office only with those whom we formally recognise, and I'm not sure of all of the facts of the situation, but if it is not an individual that we formally recognise, then clearly it is not a matter that I could pursue. But he will no doubt fill me in with the details in due course. As I say, I will be speaking. I've already got phone calls lined up with both the High Commissioner for Pakistan and for India during the course of this afternoon, and we'll have other conversations as well.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There have been concerning reports emerging in the last few minutes that the Indian and Pakistani armies are now engaged in heavy artillery exchanges across several locations on the line of control in Western Kashmir. This clearly seems to be escalating at a rapid rate. The Minister has undertaken to communicate with both sides in this conflict and understand the situation. Will he commit to the FCO updating this House within the next 24 hours in the latest situation, and what particular actions the Foreign and Commonwealth Office will be taking to de-escalate, in particular addressing the United Nations Security Council on this issue?
Listen, we have the mechanism of urgent questions, obviously, just to be able to deal with these matters. And if there is an update, clearly we will want to make the House aware of it at the earliest possible opportunity. As I said, I'm hoping to be away out of the House, to be in the region during the course of the next 24 hours. So it may not be within quite the time frame he has in mind, but we will obviously do our best once facts are established to be able to inform the House of what is going on.
Martin Doherty-Hughes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Global markets are now trading lower with Asian investors seeking sanctuary in either the yen or the Swiss franc. So, because of the conflict. First of all, can the Minister assure UK investors of their investments within the region? And secondly, Mr Speaker, I don't have a huge Indian or Pakistani diaspora, but I have one UK-born citizen from Dumbarton called Jagtar Singh Johal in an Indian jail, being held arbitrarily without trial for over 500 days by the Indian Republic. So through the fog of impending war, can the Minister, who I'm grateful is going to India, remind the Indian state of its duty to uphold the rule of international law, either in border affairs and in human rights for UK nationals in their jails?
The Johal case is a matter that's been brought up on the floor of the House, and obviously, as the honourable gentleman is well aware, we've met on 2 or 3 occasions in the Foreign Office on this matter, and I will pledge to bring this up in my discussions in New Delhi that I hope to undertake on Friday. I think it would be unwise to say anything about the international markets. Suffice to say that I very much hope that those businesses, particularly businesses where there are the diaspora engaged in Kashmir and in the region, will feel confident in the longer term and that they are doing the right thing by engaging as fully as they are. Mr Speaker, if I may just say, I know this has taken a long time, well over an hour for an urgent question. I'm very struck by just how passionate many members are about this particular issue, not just for those who have significant diaspora. This is obviously a fast-moving, fluid situation. I'm sure that we will come back to the House at some point to discuss this further. And as I say, I think the one big message for all of us is to do all that we can within our communities to try and de-escalate and to calm many of the understandable passions that are there.
And thank you to colleagues. Order. 10 minutes.